Hello, everyone, and welcome to our BCA Center for Buddhist Education seminar on Kinnara and the roots of Buddhist Taiko. We'll begin with Gasho, please. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. As many of you may know, in Buddhism, a Kinnara is a mythical musician, half human and half bird. And in many of our temples, you can see images of a Kinnara playing instruments or flying around, usually in the Naijing area. However, for many of us in BCA, when you hear Kinnara, you think of the musical group from Senshin Buddhist Temple, which laid the foundation for Taiko and Gagaku in much of the United States. And as Kinnara Taiko introduced Taiko to our BCA temples, it spread and became a part of the Japanese American cultural identity. As with our temples, Taiko has changed over the years. Kinnara Taiko is now over 50 years old. I'd like to thank Kinnara for agreeing to present us their history. So now I'd like to introduce two of my friends who've been extremely important to not only Taiko, but my personal introduction to interest in Jodo Shinshu. Reverend Mas Kodani, Minister Emeritus of the Buddhist Churches of America, and Johnny Mori, two of the founders of Kinnara. Reverend Mas was born and raised in LA, graduated from UC Santa Barbara, and received his MA from Ryukoku University in Kyoto. He then returned and began his career at Senshin Buddhist Temple, where he served for over 40 years. He was one of the first people who inspired me to even think of becoming a minister and taught me the importance of and responsibilities of being a Japanese American Jodo Shinshu minister. He was the minister of the Senshin Buddhist Temple from 1968 to 2013. And although he's retired, he still can be found at the Senshin Buddhist Temple, helping Reverend Yuta Furumoto, the current minister there. I've known Johnny Mori for most of my life. Our families go back to Mie, Japan. Johnny was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, but raised in Los Angeles. He is a musician and arts educator and administrator. He was the original Taiko player for the Grammy-nominated jazz fusion band, Hiroshima. I'm so happy that they are here today to talk with us about Kinnara. So at this time, I'd like to turn things over to them. We'll begin with a slideshow they prepared, and we'll then have a short discussion with Johnny and Reverend Mas and other members of Kinnara that have joined us today. So I'll turn the time to you, Johnny. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry. And thank you everybody for logging on to this particular webinar today. Some months back, Jerry had asked if we would be available and interested in sharing our experience with others in the BCA and within the Taiko community, basically about our history. At this time, though, I'd like to introduce Reverend Mas Kodani, who he and his fellow reverends were very concerned in terms of the direction of BCA, Jodo Shinshu Buddhism in the United States. And this is around when Reverend Mas returned from the studies in Japan, and he came to Southern California. And ever since then, it's been a very exciting and fun situation in terms of dealing with Jodo Shinshu Buddhism and Senshin, and with other folks that helped develop and help maintain the Taiko group, the Gagaku Bugaku group, and Kinnara in general. So I'd like to turn it over to Reverend Mas Kodani. Say hello, Mas.
Hello. Are we going to start the slideshow now? Or? Okay, well, anyway, I started Senshin at 1968. That's when I returned from Kyoto. And until 1968, I knew 4 Buddha hits. That's it. 4 Japanese Americans. I didn't grow up with them. I didn't know them. When I did meet them, I thought they were very strange people. And then I went to Japan. So when I came back to Senshin, it was a new experience for me as well. It was kind of rediscovering what was familiar, but not with actual JA. So all that begins in 1968. As far as Taiko, we formed Kinnara the following year, but we didn't become incorporated for some years later. But we formed the group as a Buddhist study group with Art Takimoto, Reverend Takimoto. And we started chanting. This is why we chose the name Kinnara. The Kinnara are the celestial musicians, but it's a little off because the Kinnara are the musicians, not the chanters. The Gandharva are the chanters. So we start off with a mistake, which is typical of us. But we kept the term Kinnara, covering all aspects of Buddhist music. And that's how Taiko started. Right? We'll talk about this, I guess, as the slide is presented, but when Johnny and I make comments about the slides, I think, I hope anyway, the difference between a Buddhist Taiko group and others should become a little more apparent, I hope. So we can start, I guess. That's our Taiko. When we decided to form a Taiko group, I wrote a letter. This is before computers, this is before online anything. So I wrote a letter to Japan and asked them for a price for a Taiko, and it was outrageously expensive. It was in the thousands then, right? So that was out. So we had to decide how we're gonna make Taikos. And so I bought this nail keg from a hardware store, an empty nail keg, and then went to Tandy's and said, do you have any rawhide? And they did. So I bought some, cut a piece, I soaked it in water, I didn't know how long. And then with Ronnie Matsuda, I tacked in one corner of it, and he pulled the opposite corner with a plier. And I said, keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling. And when I thought it was taut enough, I nailed it in. And we kept doing this all the way around. And that was our first Taiko. The problem with that is you can't stretch it tight enough. So it goes flat very quickly, and then you have to heat it up every time you want to play it. Right? So we had to figure out another way of tightening it. And so somebody gave me a picture, I think it was from Miyamoto, of the old way of stringing leather on a taiko and then putting the bachi in between and twisting the rope so it tightened and pulled it down, right? Which works for a while. And so then that graduated into using a car jack to stretch it, which gave you a lot more control. And that's how we started building these taikos. The taiko on the left is the temple taiko, the original Bomodori taiko at the temple. And when we were putting that away, we just played for about 3 hours straight and decided we should use this more often. And that's how we started to try to get more taiko. We were afraid to cut the opposite end because I thought it would just explode, you know. So for the longest time, we had a one-sided taiko. Well, once we got the jack system down, we started to skin both sides. And to this day, we have not bought a taiko from Japan except for a shime. And Johnny will tell you how it develops into the taikos we have now. But this was the first performance, one of the first performances that we did. And these are the original members. We still not sure about who the person is on the right, on the very far right. This is Robert Takashima on the left, a guy named Kenny Fukumoto, and we're not sure who is standing behind me. It had to be after a service because I'm wearing these fancy hakama.
So also too, if you notice that, the barrels, I didn't call them taikos yet, but the barrels are on chairs. If you notice the original the wadaiko on the left has a stand, and then there's two chairs, and then there's this Boy Scout tripod that you see on the right. And if you also notice from this picture and the picture previously, we have put hooks on the barrels, and then we strung the ropes, around in the loops and around the hooks and stuff like that, and tied it to the tripod on the bottom. So that's the beginning to try to figure out how to put the taikos on a stand. So that was kind of exciting to try to figure out also too. So we made the taikos, but how do you play them? What do you put them on? So we didn't have a clue with that either. So yeah, we haven't figured out how to make And then this is another version, a little bit more, but still only one-sided, and still using rope to secure the taikos onto a stand. This is another picture. This was at Nishihonganji, the Betsui in downtown Los Angeles. Can't remember exactly for what event. The last picture that you saw with Kenny, as Reverend Mas mentioned, Kenny Fukumoto. Some of you may know Kenny from Monterey, and he had a restaurant there, Flying Fish or something like that. So he was one of the original members in the group. Like next, okay, this is Reverend Mas, Clark Nakashita, and George Yamashita. And we had all our taikos out and people playing them. I think the taiko in the middle is Nishi's. Next. Majority of our performances, presentations we're at Obons. This made some sense for us to have it out there. And that's personally, like probably a lot of people on this call, first exposure to taiko. So attending Obon de Senshin from a very, very young age, this would always be at Senshin's Obon. And we had this individual, Mr. Inoue Sensei, because he was also the principal of the Japanese language school at Senshin. And he knew the dances, he knew the songs, and he knew what not to play. So that was his biggest teaching element to us. If it feels like you want to play there, don't.
Right. We would just like to say, or I would just like to say, that the worst taiko, the worst Bon-Odori taiko players are regular taiko players, for a very simple reason. A regular taiko player is a performance taiko. Bon-Odori taiko should not be noticed unless it's not there at all. It's to help the dancer dance. And therefore, it's there are no patterns. It's just a very sparse accenting of the music. And what Inoue Sensei taught us was to watch the dancer's feet. And you play to help the dancers move. Most taiko groups, when they volunteer or intrude on the Bon-Odori, they're just playing their pattern, and they don't care what it sounds, how it affects the dancing. And so that happened to us very early on. And our our dancing members, especially the older ladies, said, "Excuse me, come down off the yagura." So the Taiko prayer came down off, and they told her, "Don't go back up." Because you can't dance. And the whole purpose of Bondori is not to listen to Taiko, it's to dance. And so that's one of the differences.
So this is West Los Angeles Obons, in which we performed at. And on the left is Christian Mashta. Probably behind her is Wendy Sahara. Behind her is Ronnie Matsuda, myself, Reverend Mas, George Abe, May Sugano, and the late Reverend Tom Kurai. And the reason why part of the reason why this picture's up here is because the other pictures that you saw were just men playing Taiko. The Kinnara from the very, very beginning has always integrated women and men playing Taiko. When we began playing Taiko in the late 60s, early 70s, and we've heard of groups from Japan, and they are basically, again, separated, either just a men's group or a women's group. At that particular time, they did not play together. But the groups in North America pretty much all began playing with men and women playing together. So we didn't think there was a big issue, but by the time that these groups in Japan started coming to North America, you know, it was a little bit of an issue, a lot of issue for a lot of people in terms of having men and women play together. And so we kind of actually changed that for people in Japan also too, because Ondegoza came to Los Angeles and they practiced at Senshin. And then eventually in the early 80s, Kodo also came to Senshin and Southern California, and we had gotten together with them. And slowly but surely, they started to change. Not only the people who participated, but just their attitude in general as far as playing Taiko and stuff. Okay, next. Again, this is an early, so if you notice this, when we started having skins on both sides, what we did was just kind of come up with different ways of securing the staves on the barrel and having the staves and the rings still hold the barrel together. So basically we just use a really heavy varathane or synthetic product on the outside that would kind of hold everything together. And then we cut off the other end, and we just hoped very much so that it would stay together, and it did.
If you notice in the bottom of the taiko, there's a swastika painted onto the face of the drum. The swastika, we used it a lot, even in our hoppies. But then gradually, because in the United States, in any case, the swastika is a symbol of Nazism, the Buddhist temples had to change their symbol from a swastika, which it was before the war, to the wisteria. But pre-war, all BCA temples had swastikas all over the place, right? But because of World War II, America no longer, looks down upon it. If you go to Japan or any Asian country, you'll see swastikas on maps, and that indicates a Buddhist temple. So one of the most ancient signs of Buddhism, which means auspicious, is the swastika, going either direction, in both directions. Because of World War II, was abolished, but it's still used in Buddhist Asia.
Okay, next. Also, too, if you know, this is a photo of us performing in Poston, Arizona, at the Indian Reservation in Poston. We went down there as a cultural performance and stuff. But if you notice, I think this is 1974, 75, 76, someplace in there. And each of us have a different hoppy coats on. Whatever we had in the drawer, whatever our grandparents had or our parents passed down to us, that's what we wore at that particular time. This particular performance was done in the middle of the day in the Indian reservation in Poston, Arizona. Now, too bad there wasn't pictures of the audiences, because there was really not that many people, you know, sharing our performance here. It's because the Native Americans start their powwow when the sun goes down. So
Mad dogs and Englishmen and Taiko people play in the noonday sun, which we did. And there's Kenny Endo right there next to Johnny.
Reverend Mas, myself, Kenny Endo, some other folks is playing Taiko. So it was a little mismatch in terms of what costumes that we were and things like that. Okay, next. This is a Haramatsuri performance that we did at a hotel. And as you can tell, there's quite a few of us. Again, Kitty and those in the back, and George, and a whole bunch of us that's in the group.
This is the first hoppy we purchased, I think.
Yes. Okay, next. This is on our trip that we took to Ogden, Utah, Salt Lake City, and Denver. I had gone out to Salt Lake City, actually Ogden. They had a Junior YBA conference, and I had met Sharon Koga in the Koga clan, and that started the relationship between Kinnara and Ogden, Utah, Salt Lake City area. And we went out there, took the whole Taiko group, the Gagaku, Bugaku group, and did performances and workshops in Ogden, Salt Lake City, and Denver. That's when we probably helped start the Denver Taiko group also too at that particular time. So this is a reception. So one of the most important things about being in Kinnara is being able to enjoy food, either before, after, or during the performance. If people couldn't pay us, give us an ore, then naturally, I think for a lot of type of groups, a lot of relationships between temples, food is always very important. It's always pretty good food. Next. Now, as Reverend Mas mentioned, this was our first hoppies that we made. So if you notice the swastika on the sleeves, we did everything actually. That was batikked and silk screened, and we had help putting everything together.
And I think, well, we stopped wearing this because we weren't aware of the fact that the Jews were shocked at seeing this, and we did play with this at somebody's bar mitzvah, not realizing that we're wearing this swastika on our sleeve, you know. And luckily, neither did the Jewish people notice it. So we didn't think about it until this picture. And after that, we quit using it. But this was our first one because it was just natural for us to use a Buddhist, the ultimate Buddhist symbol. But we haven't used it after that. You know. In Japan, you will see this pattern all the time in all kinds of things and all kinds of clothes. But we have it as a museum piece now. But this was the first time we silk screened and put together the happi, our own, simply because you couldn't buy a decent happi. You know, everything we did, we had to do because we couldn't buy it. And we were very principled at first, but then when it came to buying the hoppies we subsequently bought, we became Taiko prostitutes. We played anywhere for anyone at any time for money. And that allowed us to purchase our first Japanese to order hoppy. So it was all very interesting. The process was complete. Costumes, travel, responsibilities, how to organize things, what's the purpose of doing this in the first place, etc. We had to meet those problems as they occurred. And that's why the group became very, very close, because it wasn't just meeting and playing taiko. It was everything. It was everything.
Supporting what Reverend Mas said, you have to remember there was nothing. There was nobody to ask. There was nobody to go to say, how do you make this taiko? Or how do you make this costume? Or how do you guys write pieces and stuff like that? There wasn't anybody around.
Yeah, even
so
stretching
I
found this guy named who made ganbops, who made conga drums in LA. It's called ganbops, Mariano Bobadilla. So I went to see him. And we got to be friends because I started ordering all the rawhide from him, and he was curious what we were doing with such big pieces of rawhide. And then he gave me tips on how to stretch things and what to do and what not to do. So it's all because we had to do everything ourselves, which was really probably the best circumstance. Yeah.
Next. So along with taiko, we also do bugaku and gagaku. And it actually started right before taiko did. As Reverend Mas, you notice the timestamp on this, it was 68 when Reverend Mas came, started Kinnara taiko officially in 69, and then 70 and 71. But gagaku, and Reverend Mas would tell you how Kinnara started playing gagaku.
Okay, gagaku is the oldest form of music that exists. Western musical notation, which is one of the great traditions of world music, doesn't begin until about the 12th century. Gagaku as a written orchestral form, some of the oldest pieces are maybe 200 BC. So it's really old. And it comes to Japan from all of the rest of Asia, dies out in all of the rest of Asia, and it's preserved only in Japan by the imperial court. And historically, when a temple, when someone from the imperial family or the aristocracy becomes a priest, that temple has the right to play gagaku. And this happens for Jodo Shinshu in the Tokugawa period, 1600s. The Monshu marries into the imperial family. And from that point, gagaku becomes part of the liturgical tradition of Nishi and Higashi. And that's why when I was in Japan, we had to study gagaku, and I took an instrument for a couple of years. So when I got back to LA, I could not believe that there was some guy at UCLA from the imperial household who was teaching gagaku, right? And being a sansei, I knew nothing about aristocracy in Japan, which Togi Sensei is. He's from one of the oldest aristocratic lines in Japan. His line, if it's true, goes back to the first emperor of China, which makes it older than the emperor's line. But anyway, I just called him on the phone. I said, "Hello, Sensei. My name is Kodani. I have a temple here at Senshin. Would you be willing to come out and teach?" And he just said, "Okay." That was it. Literally, he said, "Okay." And then I found out about him later. But for 30 years, while he was here at UCLA, he came to Senshin and taught twice a month, gagaku and bugaku. So we were really fortunate to stumble onto him. And also we became very close because we had to create our own costumes for Bugaku and Gagaku at first, and we worked with Togi Sensei, and he kind of adopted us. Towards the end, he had an annual sushi making party for us, and he would make the sushi, and we would go to his house, and that kind of thing. We went on tours together and so forth. So all this happened kind of like by accident. And none of it was planned, which I think is a very Buddhistic point of view. We don't plan for, if you were serious about living in the present, what are you talking about? The future of Taiko and the future of the temple and the future of this, right? The fact is that Buddhism says the present is the only thing that is real. And whoever can live in that present moment is a Buddha, right? Unfortunately, there are very few Buddhas around, which means all of us do not live in the present. We live in the past or the future, daydreaming, right? And anyone who says, I only live in the present is lying. That's what he wants to be, right? Because the present is always changing. And we are told, just worry about the present right now, right? And if you do, when something comes up, you just react to it. If it's something you planned for 20 years and it doesn't come up, you're still in the future waiting for that thing to happen. And so you're not in the present, right? So by not planning, really good things happen to you. My advice for Buddhist Taiko people is don't plan for the future and don't plan for your kids. If you're not going to the temple and enjoying playing Taiko with the group and presenting it to the temple members, why should your kids follow you? And if you're talking about how to get youth to the temple and your own kids don't come, shut up. Don't bother us. You get what we say, right? There is a point to Buddhism, and it means a lot of it is, I'm sorry, but a lot of it is profoundly un-American. It's hard to be a Buddhist in America and have American values, I think. Be yourself, have a strong self-image. You got to do it your way. That's all bull. That's all self-centered ego. And Buddhism has a lot to teach us in this way. Taiko is perfect. You don't have time to put on. You either play that beat or it's gone, right? And if you miss it, you can't cover it. You have to say, it's missed, and you go on with it. It's like chanting. You don't have time to say, why am I doing this? You just do it, right? Well, I don't understand it. That's an excuse for not wanting to do it, right? And then once you get good at it, what do? You flaunt it, right? You're hopeless egocentrics. That's what this is for, I think. That's what Taiko is for. It's immediate. It's to show you what you've always imagined to be true, but has never accepted as true, that you're a self-centered, egomaniacal control freak. And the ability to see that is the ability to let it go. The ability to let it go is the ability to see reality for the first time. This is Buddhist Taiko, I think.
Thanks, Mas. Next. So we call this a horaku, but it's also, I think, our first or 10-year anniversary of Kinnara. So this was done at Nishonganji Betsuin. And we have Danaho Koda, this is from the left to right, Manimatsu, Sharon Koga, probably Clark, and then myself, and then Paige Morikawa and Chris Yamashita. Now, this is another hapi that we made. These actually are white and purple. You'll see it again in another couple of other shots. So again, we started to develop our taiko making, our hapi making, and on our interpretation of Shishimai. So this is a Japanese American Buddhist version of Shishimai. There are traditional Edo era moves and rhythms and patterns and melodies of Shishi, but this is pretty much our interpretation of Shishimai. You want to give a story about the Shishi head, Mas?
I found this in a gift shop in Little Tokyo, and I bought it for, I think, for $200 then. And what it was it was brought from Tokyo by a student who was going to USC, and his father was a carver of shishi. So the father told him, "Here, take this in case you need some extra money. Maybe you could sell this." And sure enough, he reached this point where he needed extra money, so he sold it to this gift shop, the owner of whom is a member of Senshin. So when I was walking by, I went in there and I saw it, and that's how we got it. And because we got it, we had to create Shishimai. See, it's backwards. None of this was planned at all. It's all Kinnara. Everything it's ever done has been an accident, a very fruitful accident, a series of accidents. We didn't plan nothing. Next.
This is our venture out to the Midwest. So in the 80s, we were invited by numerous temples throughout North America. And Midwest Buddhist Temple through Reverend Ron Miyamura, who I believe is on this call. I know his wife, Elaine, is on the call. And we were able to go out there and play in the summertime in August, the third weekend of August. Just like the third weekend in Seattle, they have events. And this is the Guinness Festival. And it was an experience for us in that we had never experienced the level of humidity anywhere east of the Rockies. And it surprised a lot of us. But it was a lot of fun too, because we were able to, at that particular time, we put all our Taikos in cardboard boxes surrounded by a sleeping bag. And we put them on the plane. We chucked them on the plane as extra luggage, and just tipped the porters, the sky caps, some extra money to put it on the plane, and they put them on the plane. So we flew everything out there as much as we could. We flew out there. So that was our adventure of packing up the stuff and shipping it out to Chicago, which is pretty interesting. Next. This is Seattle. That's why I mentioned it. So this is the color of the hoppies that we had made and stuff. So this is very, very fun in terms of going out to these different places and helping to set up and perform at their obon. And it's very fun to go to these different obons and experience the ways and styles and of their obon. When we went to Seattle, they do dances at least 20 minutes long. And you do it on the street in front of the temple. And the street goes down, but it also goes up. So you make this loop. And it is so crowded. It was so crowded that it was hard for you to get in it, and it was hard for you to get out of it. But you follow this mass of people. And again, it was a lot of fun. Had a good time. That was in the 80s. Next. Again, they fed us. And thank you very much, Seattle, for hosting us and providing the great food. I think this is the first time for a lot of us to eat white salmon. So that was pretty special for us. Thank you very much. Next.
Horaku is a special term in Buddhism. It means Dharma Entertainment. And it was entertainment that was performed after major services, very often as part of the otoki, the vegetarian food that was served by the Fujinkais. And up until World War II, for Japanese American culture, the Japanese part of it was the performing arts were considered an important part of the education of any human being, that you were not quite civilized unless you could perform some cultural thing, whether it's reciting a poem, singing a song, doing a stupid dance with chopsticks in your nose, whatever it was. Everybody was expected to offer something. For the very important reason, it wasn't how good you were. Good was defined as how well you entertained your audience, right? And so everybody was expected to participate. This comes to a sudden end at Pearl Harbor. And everything comes to a sudden end because the very things that made you Japanese, especially in the temples, were the enemy. So overnight, all of this disappears. The Gaoku that was here before us starts in the Northwest. In the early 1911, had full Gaoku orchestras. Those costumes disappeared. The instruments were destroyed in many cases. The music was buried, everything. So it all comes to a sudden stop. And when we come back out of the camps, it's still now labeled the old traditional ghetto culture, something that we need to get away from. And so a new culture was created by sanseis, mostly who were school teachers. And they used choirs, whatever they taught in school became the horaku at the temples. So instead of adults doing the entertainment, children did it. And that ended the cultural connection to the past. This starts to change in the 60s and the 70s with a few JAs who were in the entertainment. Luckily, we had a person at our temple called Nobuko Miyamoto who worked on Obon and other things. But all the JA actors, the Asian American actors and so forth, were very important at that time to show my generation that entertaining was a very important cultural tradition, something that had been forced out of us. And it's only now that we're looking at the arts as essential. In America, they're still not essential. They're the first things to be dropped out of a curriculum. Music drops out if you don't have money, right? All of that drops out. In Asia, if you can't sing a song or hum a tune or recite one line of poetry, you're not civilized. You're not a civilized human being, a balanced human being. So the performing arts are crucial in what used to be our cultural tradition. It's only now being revived. And well, I guess Taiko is one of the two JA performing arts forms. One is Obon, Bon Odori, which has no counterpart in Japan. It's very different from what it is here. And that's the JA creation. The second JA creation would be Taiko, I suppose, those two.
Chris, can you go either forward or back? Go forward one. Okay. Can you go back one more time? You go back one more. Yeah. Okay. Not only did Seattle provide this gracious otoki for us to eat all the time, but they took us to the basement, and in their basement there was this room full of instruments and costumes and props and instruments. So as we went down there, they kind of said, oh, we have this other shishi head that we don't know what to do with it. And I see you guys have one. So why don't you take this? There was also a shime daiko, a small rope shime daiko. And they go, well, we don't use this anymore. Would you like to have it? And here we are kind of like, just wanting to take these things, in which we graciously accepted. figured out how to ship it back to Los Angeles. But as Reverend Mas had mentioned, Seattle Betsuin had this room full of a full-on production theater equipment that we were able to look at to see what was usable. And thank you very much, Seattle, for all the years in which you helped us with instruments and concepts in terms of for us to move forward. So again, thank you very much, Seattle Betsuin, for us to do this. So as we tour the United States, so to speak, in terms of doing workshops and seminars and stuff like that, people usually provide us with instruments to say, here, take this. You don't know what to do with it, you know. So if you have a chance, look in your basements or look in your attics. You'll find a treasure trove of stuff that if you don't know what it is, I'm sure you could Google it and find out what it is and figure out how to use it. Because at one particular point in time, it was used by the temple. That's why it's there.
And if you don't want it, we'll take it. Send it to us.
Thank you. Next. Okay. This is one of our, again, performances and concerts that we had at the Japan American Theater at the Japanese American Culture Community Center in downtown Little Tokyo. But if you notice the different taikos that we have, many different kinds, some with still with bands on it, some without bands. We do have a wadaiko that George is playing on. And if you notice, some of these taikos in the back do not have bands on them. It's a combination of the bands are underneath the skins, and some of the taikos we were able to hook up with this gentleman. His name is Stanley Morgan, and he was a woodworker. He worked with wood and stuff, but he showed us how to take a barrel apart and put it back together again with guides in between the staves. Basically, there were nails between the staves, and you would mark them and you put them back together so they would put back together, and it would have the outside would be smooth, so to speak. The inside would be jagged or different levels and stuff. But he showed us and he started us on the method in terms of taking a barrel apart and putting it back together. And we started using fine California oak wine barrels. In the city of San Pedro, in the southern part of Los Angeles, there was a large Italian community, and they made their own wines and beers and stuff. So we purchased oak wine barrels. And then later on, we knew that Sonoma, Napa Sonoma made their own wine barrels too. So we took a truck up to that wine area, and we got some barrels and stuff. We came down, and we again seriously got back into making taikos again and skinning them traditionally how they do in Japan. Talking to skin suppliers in mid-America, in Kansas City, in St. Louis, and in Texas, where they still process skins. So we really actually got into it quite a bit in terms of how to make taikos and stuff. So that was part of the evolution in terms of how we get to the next step. Like Reverend Mas said, once we get to a certain level and we don't know it, then we would ask questions, or people would actually volunteer information to us and say, hey, you ought to try it this way, you ought to try it that way. And a lot of times we share that information or learn the information and share it. Okay. Next. As Reverend Mas had mentioned, this is our first hoppies that we co-designed and had made in Japan. Started this particular process of the quality of the material, the cleanness of the printing of the hoppy. And it just felt right. Next. We usually have potlucks or dinners, and invite a lot of folks from Japan that we knew were in town and stuff like that, and performances and stuff. So this was a potluck for Gagaku, but Gagaku and Taiko was played at the same place. So we just started jamming, and folks from their Gagaku orchestra came up and played Taiko. So we usually do things with a lot of fun. Next. We went to Charlotte, North Carolina, of all places. And because of the large Japanese corporate community that they had out there, they invited folks, and we went out there and taught odori to them, of a lot of the dances that we perform at our obons. Dance teachers, we took dance teachers out there, and they taught the community odori pieces, songs, and music, and we played taiko for them at the same time. Next. A lot of local stuff. This is another hobby that we had gotten from Japan. So we kind of started going that particular direction after a while, but we also had influence in terms of us being, for us designing our own hobbies. Next. We had a rare opportunity to have Kenny Endo, to perform with Kenny Endo and Eitetsu Hayashi at a performance produced by the Japanese American Culture Community Center, JACCC, in the mid-'80s. And this is a reception again that we had prior to or maybe after the concert. Next. 90s. This is Brian Yamami. Some of you are very familiar. He was part of our group and now is the leader of his own group, Taiko Project. Next. Brian Yamami and Michelle, she has her group, Unit Sozo, up in the Northwest Portland area. Next. Another obon that we did in Southern California at Higashi Buddhist Temple. Next. This is in Arkansas. This is showing how a lot of our stands collapse so we can stick them on the plane. It just shows us putting them together prior to the performance. Next. Oxnard Obon in the mid-'90s. Next. Pepperdine University, again in Southern California. Next. Again, same place. Some more of our group and other performances. Next. This is in Little Tokyo. Southern District has developed a bookstore, and we call it Honganji Place. And it was originally located in a commercial space storefront in downtown Los Angeles in Little Tokyo. It has since moved to Senshin. Saves a lot of money on rent, and it's a lot more convenient. Next. This is a photo of Tomomi Hongo, daughter of Etsuo Hongo, who established many types of groups in Southern California and also in South America. Fortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago, but she is a lot older now, in which she's a high school teacher, and she also conducts her own taiko groups. One in which her father started at El Marino Elementary School in Culver City. It's a language immersion school, and her father started taiko group, and she's continuing it with other members of the taiko community in Southern California, and she has a youth taiko group that she also leads. Next. Reverend Mas, you want to explain the relationship with Arpana?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how it all started, but I met a woman named Ramya Harishankar, who is a teacher of Bharatanatyam, who lives in Irvine. And we just said we should get together, and they would choreograph a dance to one of our taiko pieces, which they did. So it's to Ashura, and they choreographed an entire dance with it. And we've performed this in several places. And then after that, they invited us on a tour of India. So a few of our taiko members went with their troupe to a performance tour of South India, which was really a great opportunity for them. So, and we still continued ever since. We took Bharatanatyam, Taiko, Gagaku, Bugaku to 3 places, Hiroshima, Kyoto, and Nara, to raise money for the tsunami. So we had performances and raised money to be donated for the tsunami relief. So we've always been going on trips together. Now Ramya wants to go to Brazil. So whether that's going to happen, we don't know, but for some reason, it's always happened. So who knows?
Thank you. Next.
And they're great to be with because they're in the same position that our kids were as Niseis. You know, when they come from India, they're born and raised in America, and they want to find their roots. What do? They find the oldest roots they can find. Bharatanatyam being one of the classical dance forms of South India. So they want to know how to get out of arranged marriages and so forth. So they're great to travel with.
Thank you. Next. Some guy with blonde hair. Next. This is a jam. This is a presentation that Kinnara did at the 1999 North American Taiko Conference. And we usually hosted a reception, meaning everybody that would attend the North American Taiko Conference would be welcome to a potluck reception at Senshin. And so you get maybe 400 or 500 people hanging out at Senshin, and this is on our stage. And this is a piece in which we just jam. We just sat down, somebody started the rhythm, and everybody just joined in. It was nothing planned, like Reverend Mas had said. It was totally spontaneous, and we just played. That taiko, the big taiko that you see in the back, was made by a gentleman known as Stanley Morgan. And he was the individual who explained to us how to take a barrel apart and put it back together. He had provided this taiko prior to his leaving Southern California and going to Arizona. There is a sister taiko of the size of this. That one was covered in white vinyl, and it was on the stage of the Grammy, and the group Imagine Dragons played it during the Grammy presentation. So taiko has evolved quite a bit in terms of being on a public stage, so to speak. And within the last, and if some of you had seen just recently the qualifying swimming from Omaha, Nebraska, after the individual got selected or won its race and was placed on the team, they were asked to go over to a taiko and to sign their name on this taiko. So the taiko is still in public's view and a national view in North America, which is a nice situation to see actually. But it's been on the Grammys, it's been on regular news, it's been on the Oscars, it's been all over the TV waves for the last 20-something years. Okay. Next. Some more performances, Watchtowers. Next. 2000, getting a little bit more closer. This is a trip that Kinnara, Taiko, Gagaku, and Bugaku took in 2001. And we went to Canyon de Chelly and performed Gagaku, Bugaku, and Taiko in Canyon de Chelly. And if you notice in this picture, Kenny Endo's in this picture with us that made this trip out to the Four Corners area of the United States.
This was to celebrate the new millennium. Reading the history of Gagaku, in the early Nara period, on the first sunrise of the new year, the Gaku Orchestra and Bugaku would perform with no audience. And the purpose of it was to align and retune themselves to the universe for the coming year. So we said, we should do that in the year 2001, which is the beginning of the new millennium. So if we did, where would we do it? And we picked Monument Valley. And we asked for permission and they didn't answer. So then we got a contact for Canyon de Chelly, and I phoned them, I wrote to them, explained what we wanted to do, and they didn't answer. So the following year, I drove out there with boxes of manju and castera as presents and met with the tribal council and finally got permission, right? And one of the reasons why they didn't answer us was they found out we were Japanese, right? And if you know about the Navajo code talkers, they volunteered to the army in the Pacific War to communicate in Navajo so the Japanese could not intercept the messages, right? So in order to do that, the Navajo Nation had to declare war on Japan, and they did. But they were not invited to the peace conference. So as far as they were concerned, they were still at war with the Japanese. And I said, no, but I'm not Japanese, I'm an American, I'm not a foreigner. And I'm telling this to a Navajo guy, right? And he says, what do you mean? You're all foreigners, right? So once we said that and started laughing, then we negotiated, and they allowed us to go into Canyon de Chelly in one of the most sacred areas of Canyon de Chelly. And so we drove out there, drove all the equipment, everything set up in the dark. So we would begin at sunrise the following morning, right? And which is what we did. I won't tell you, well, strange things happened that could not have happened physically, but they did. And the Navajos didn't bat an eye. We were astounded. We found the exact place we were going to set up the following morning to check to see when the sun came over the cliff and down into the valley, right? And it was at 10 o'clock, right? So we said, fine, we'll go early and we'll set up and wait for it. So the next day we go early, set up, and the sun comes over an hour earlier at the exact same spot 24 hours later. Is that possible? That's not possible, right? So I'm telling the tour guide, this is not possible. And he says, oh, it happens sometimes. I said, yeah, but it can't. We were here yesterday at the same party. And he said, it came out, didn't it? So I shut up and we went on with the concert. Several things like this happened on this trip, which were kind of very strange. But anyway, it was a great trip because everybody had to plan to get out there in the pitch darkness, set up everything, and we performed. So it was one of our major trips.
Next.
I think we have a couple of shots.
Yeah, too much.
This is the actual performance on the floor of Canyon de Chelly. This is the Bugaku portion. And the sunlight came out an hour ahead. So we were shooting into the sun. And that's why, by accident, this gorgeous shot, we got this photograph taken. Excuse me, I gotta go put my dog out.
Next. In 2001, there was a North American Taiko Conference, and it just so happened to land on the same day as Senchin's Obon. So this is Seiichi Naka Sensei, San Francisco Taiko Dojo, and I kind of jamming together. Next. Again, this is part of the jam that happens at the Taiko conference reception. In the center is Alan Okada from New York and Ling Taro from, I think he's Seattle now. Next. Kenny might be able to help me on this too, but I know it's Mr. Miyamoto. I'm not exactly sure who's in the middle. Kenny, do you know? Can you recognize that person? Kenny might not be able to hear me right now. Okay, next. This is another trip that we did. This is out and performed with Zenshin Taiko in Maui as part of their annual Taiko festival that they have. So this is pretty much a youth group that they have. And these kids are really, really good. They teach themselves. One generation goes through, and then the next generation, the older generation teaches the younger generation. And they have guidance from Taiko folks from all over the world helping them out and stuff. Next. Again, always food that needs to be available. And this is part of the reception of the Taiko conference. Next. This is a trip which Mas had explained with our relationship with Arpana. And this is the trip that they took in 2007, right before the North American Taiko Conference happened. Next. Part of Senshin's culture, so to speak, is that we're in a very, very fun situation in that some time ago, the Senshin board members decided to look elsewhere to raise funds for the temple. A lot of temples depend upon carnivals associated with their obon to raise money for the temple. And we were in the same position quite many years and stuff like that, until we got to a certain particular point in time in which we did not have the capability to do carnival anymore as a fundraiser. So then we decided to forego that and just have an obon and serve just enough snacks, hot dogs, snow cones, satisfies people's hungry, not to make money. And all the organizations that do provide food for our obon don't necessarily make a whole bunch of money, but just provide a service. So, and at the end of the obon, and those of you who have had the opportunity to come, we have you go almighty, and we come out and we have you light a lantern of the 1,000 lanterns that we put out in our courtyard. And after you light a lantern, you come around and we provide free somen. So everybody gets to have somen after you dance. Come into the social hall, and Kinnara or Senshin puts on a presentation, a horaku, in which our kids taiko group plays, the adult taiko group plays. And sometimes we have people that just stand up and want to sing, come up and sing. This is a part of the whole horaku tradition of providing something at the end of the obon for us at Senshin. So this is us preparing the somen for that evening's obon odori. Next, again, prepping for the somen. Next. Next. This is a performance that we did in Little Tokyo in front of the Japanese American National Museum. I can't remember what event this is for. One of many that we've done downtown. Next. Same performance. Next. Again, another community performance. This is an elder statesman, George Abe, we call Moon Man in Jamin. And behind on the left is Nancy Sekizawa and Ronnie Matsuda. Nancy actually was the original lead singer of the band Hiroshima. And her name actually, she went by Atomic Nancy because her folks own the Atomic Cafe in Little Tokyo. At the age of 14 and a half, 15, she could sing her ass off. She's a lot older in this picture, but that's when she started singing. Next, 2010. This is Reverend Mas's 40th anniversary. So we all had a party at Senshin. Next. Jumped really quick, 2019, in which this was our 50th anniversary year. And rather than doing a concert, we did a lot of little things. This was one of them, in which was a Buddhist Taiko workshop held at Senshin. Invited majority of the folks are all the Buddhist Taiko groups in Southern California, which there are probably 6 or 7 Taiko groups that are based out of the Buddhist churches in the Southern District. And this was one of our workshops that we hosted. Next. Another part of the work, this is a Shishimai workshop. Next. And this is toward the end. This was, had everybody jump up and start dancing. I can't remember exactly what dance this was. Could have been Eijinaika, it could have been just Bon Odori Uta, one of the dances. Next. This is another performance that we did during the 2019 year. Next. Next. Part of the program was, again, a joint piece with our Arpana Dance Company. Next. This was right after service, a regular Sunday service. We did this No Frills pop-up concert for folks at Senshin, and I think within the Taiko committee, we put the word out for that. Next. Next. This is again the Shishimai that we did. The Shishi with the red hair in the back, that was the one in which Seattle Betsuin had donated to Kinnara. Thank you very much. This was done at the North American Taiko Conference, our presentation at the Taiko Jam. This was in Portland, Oregon in 2019. Next. Again, a piece at the conference. Next. And that is the end of our slideshow. Thank you very much. This is the current group of folks that play Taiko within the group. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reverend Kodani and Johnny. Thank you for that really, really interesting slideshow and presentation. I'm sure people really, really enjoyed it. I think at this time in the program, Reverend Jerry, did you have some kind of final comments and thoughts before you formally closed the video, and then we can open it up for questions?
I just had, well, it was actually Johnny who told me to do this. You know, Johnny, I have to do whatever he tells me, like Reverend Russell Hamada used to say. So he said, this is your idea, so you better say something. So it's a question really to Reverend Mas, Johnny, and all of Kinnara. Let me explain. I first thought about wanting Kinnara to be the subject of our CBE seminar when I watched the PBS documentary called The Black Church with Professor Lewis Gates. And in this program, they showed how the African-American church began with a very strong emphasis on strictly educated clergy so that they could gain credibility in America. And our Buddhist churches of America also began with highly trained Buddhist priests. The first group sent to America in the late 19th and 20th centuries were usually from generations of priestly families, and then the elite were sent to the US. However, then they had to start training American-born clergy. And it was a quandary kind of what we do with these American-born barbarians. So it was necessary to make sure that these native-born priests were properly educated. And in the Black Church documentary, they explained the music in the church was used as a vehicle to express the spirituality of their teachings through sound and body. This music then influenced the development of an African-American cultural identity, which has now gone beyond the boundaries of their church. And in a similar manner, I felt that Taiko, especially Kinnara, seemed to represent a way to reflect the spiritual power of the message of Jodo Shinshu in our Japanese American culture. However, as Japanese Americans, we are native English speakers, and it may have been difficult to speak about the spirituality of Jodo Shinshu in English. However, Taiko and Gagaku transcended those barriers. And as our BCA temples have changed, like the Black Church, Taiko has now moved beyond the cultural and religious barriers from which they were established, just as some of our BCA temples struggled to keep Jodo Shinshu the center of their temples. So how does Kinnara keep their foundations of Jodo Shinshu and Buddhism with this changing nature of Taiko in America? And do you feel there's a difference between Taiko in America and Taiko in our Jodo Shinshu temples? And can this difference continue? So I want to leave that up to Reverend Mas, Johnny, and Kinnara to comment on this.
Okay. Up until Taiko, the main Japanese American traditions are Bon-Dori and the Buddhist temple, because the Buddhist temple represents a Japanese form of Buddhism, and so its practice takes a Japanese form, right? Amongst a group that is increasingly becoming distant from that cultural form, right? Especially accelerated by World War II. And I think one of the tragic results of going to concentration camps in our own country is that the Sansei generation and the Yonsei generation have a kind of deep-seated inferiority complex, that everything American is good, and therefore if the BCA wants to survive as a temple institution, it has to be more American and less Japanese, right? My feeling is most JA communities or JA Buddhist communities feel this way. There are exceptions, and Senshin, I think, is one of those exceptions, that I don't see much in American culture or American religion in particular that needs emulating at all. If anything, we're way ahead of that. The fact that we are the only atheist religion in the world is important. It's profoundly important. right? We do not believe in God, and prayer is a useless habit. It is not to be done. It's a superstition. But because we have been intimidated not to speak in that way, we lose out in our tradition. And the more we try to, what? I don't even understand what they mean by become more American. There is no more American person than me in this country. I'm as American as anybody else. And if I eat sushi, sushi is American. Not because it's from Japan and it's finally acceptable. I eat it. I'm an American. Sushi is an American. If a Dutchman comes and eats a cookie is no longer Dutch. It's a Dutch American. It's American. You know, we don't argue you have to give up tacos. Right? Why do you have to give up eating with hashi? Right? All this stuff is a kind of, I think, result of we were betrayed. The Niseis were betrayed in World War II, and their children grew up in the shadow of that betrayal and are very conscious of approval of what we do. This is why we very rarely talk about Jodo Buddhists or atheists, right? But the Buddha said we suffer because we're because of attachment. He didn't mean attachment to things. He said attachment to two important ideas, right? And which boil down to, we're attached to the idea that there is a creator God, and we're attached to the idea that there's the eternal soul, both of which are not true. And yet we can't get rid of it. And that's why we suffer. This is a radically unacceptable explanation in America. It happens to be Buddhist and it happens to be true. You know? And as long as that's not a core issue for Jodo Shinshu people, I suspect we will disappear. And Senshin will be the last to disappear because we will hold out to the very end with what we think is valuable. Rugged individualism is a mistake. It's a tragic mistake. And satisfying your personal needs is nothing more than ego. And if you look at Jodo Shinshu, since we don't have any magic, we don't have omamuris, we can't sell you arrows at the end of the year for protection, we don't cure diseases or anything. What's the ritual for? Right? Except the ritual that doesn't work. Every other Buddhist temple in town, the ritual works. It can cure you of anything. The Soka Gakkai can get you a Cadillac if you want it. Right? Namami Dabasu is completely worthless, and that's why it is of ultimate value. It is not about that kind of religion at all. At all. It's about the fundamental Buddhist idea that we ignore ourselves, our ego. And as long as we ignore our ego, we cannot be in touch with reality. It's not a matter of accepting our ego, it's a matter of seeing it, right? And therefore, we started off, and I hope we still maintain, that if people in the Taiko group are so proficient that they're complaining about somebody who can't keep up, then the people who are complaining have to go. Because they're the problem. They're trying to divide this group by ability, and you can't do that. If you did, all of us would have to leave somewhere, right? And that's not the point. The point is like pounding mochi. The point is getting together on Sunday and chanting and being embarrassed by it. That's the point. You do it together, right? And it doesn't matter whether it's well done or not well done. The fact that it's done together without ego, a minimum of ego, is the whole point. This is why in temples, Taiko people come in generation after generation. Johnny is teaching children, and soon probably his grandchildren. That's the whole point. That's the whole point. It's nothing special at all, right? The last time I was at Taiko conference, they asked me to comment on, Taiko is my life. What do you think? I said, you need to get another life. If Taiko is your whole life, there's something wrong with you. For a Buddhist temple, Taiko is a part of what we do when we go there. That's all it is. But we do it together. And in that process, trying to see our ego. And the ego is a very tricky thing. When you see it, you say, now I understand. No, you don't. You go back to doing it somewhere else. At first, you go to temple and are embarrassed because you don't want to chant in an unintelligible language. And then you get used to it, and what do? You flaunt it. Right? You don't want to go to Bawandari because you don't know the dances. Right? So what do? You go to practice. And when you go to practice and go to Bawandari, you flaunt it. In either case, it's driven by ego. Ego because that's what makes you embarrassed, and ego because you've done it better than somebody else. That's not seeing your ego, right? And it seems to me Taiko is the most direct way of encountering your ego and making you see it. And once you see it, you can forget it and play. And this realm is called, in Buddhism, I think, the Taiko plays you. All this time, you want to play the Taiko to kick ass. And finally, you forget about that, and the Taiko plays you. And this includes everybody who is listening to it, who's playing it, etc. This is what Nembutsu means. You say Namandabutsu hoping for this, or hoping for that, hoping for enlightenment. And then you finally, in disgust, forget about it. And suddenly the Nembutsu says you. It's all together. It's the same. Mochitsuki Taiko and say Namamidabutsu and chanting is the same. It's the same purpose. It's the same reality. In that case, it doesn't matter who plays Taiko. It doesn't matter what you're wearing. But if you got some money, buy it, you're happy. But don't get crazy about it. I think that's Buddhist Taiko. And you can tell. I think you can tell when you see a group playing, whether they're playing out of the sheer enjoyment of each other's company or they're trying to impress somebody. And there's a big difference. Non-temple groups split and resplit and form and reform endlessly out of ego, out of sheer ego. Everybody has an ego, but you don't have to flaunt it. And don't worry, even in your most egoless moments, when the Taiko plays you, you will always return to, let's play this next piece and kick ass. It'll always come back. But that's what Jodo Shinshu is about. And without it, who cares what happens to Taiko?
Thank you, Reverend Mas. It's hard to follow him, but are there comments from any of the members of Kinnara?
Well, as mentioned, which I think all the ministers say, Jodo Shinshu is not simple. It's pretty difficult to understand. It's a lifelong learning process and stuff. So how do you use, or how do you take what Reverend Mas had said and to apply it to a weekly practice or something like that? So it comes down to, like, as Reverend Mas had mentioned, it moves forward as fast. And even this word is not degrading or anything like that, but we go as slow as the slowest learner, so to speak. So we go as fast as that particular person. So, not everybody's going to get each pattern all the time. There are times in which, as we get older, we just either forget or just have a harder time to learn the piece, the new piece. Teaching an old dog new tricks is seriously pretty tough, and it is true. So we just try to understand as much as we can, to be able to move it forward, but with everybody involved and a collective decision to try to do that. at times it's very frustrating because people individually, just kind of give up that particular night, but kind of realize that they need to contribute, and they practice at home. They come back next week and they got the pattern. So, that's a practical application of how we kind of view this thing in terms of our practices and stuff like that. Lately, we've been in a position to, when people ask, well, how much do you charge? And we just go, well, you have a budget for this. And whatever you could either afford or whatever you plan as your budget, we would kindly accept that particular donation, honorarium, or ode, however you want to call it. And so then it's really interesting in that we're not putting a price out there. So then we have pride in terms of what we put out there, but it's not necessary now it does not turn into a paid performance. Because once you get into a situation in which a paid performance, a lot of attitudes change. Our attitude in terms of doing well and fulfilling this particular commitment, and then the producer, the person who's hiring you, and what they expect out of you. They expect this amount of time, this amount of performance. But if it's almost like a voluntary thing or an ode thing, and we don't know the amount of money in which we're doing it for, but we're doing it either for the cause or a lunch afterwards, right? That we know is going to be good. So there's different factors that are involved in terms of us just agreeing to do a performance. And a lot of it has to do with the finances, because we all know we get weird over finances of how much they're going to pay us. And so how much they're going to pay us and how much we got to put out. So, I mean, that's just ingrained in us, hopefully, wishfully, you hope you could not have to do that, but we're in that position now that if they ask how much, whatever you could afford. So it's a lot less kind of a pressure kind of thing, if you want to put it that way. And I think our relationship with a lot of the folks, there's probably 4 of us that have been around for a very, very long time. And so the whole situation is considered to be like family, and you have arguments with people and stuff, and seeing what the welfare of the individuals in the group are and stuff, So I'm sure many other temples and organizations have this and been around a long time. So, I'm pretty sure majority of you understand what we're talking about here in terms of this group collective kind of decision kind of thing.
If you think like family, you can't kick out family.
Right. You're stuck with that person.
Family.
So we got to try to figure out how to deal with that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It doesn't always go smoother if you like that, but it happens, So if it's going to maintain, how we're going to maintain it, we just try to do the best we can. People have talked about having summer schools at their temple, in which we do. We have this Saishin Dojo. It's 35, 40 years old. And so then 30, 45 years old, we've been teaching Taiko for that long to these kids. So thousands of kids have gone through this program. And so they know at least a little bit about Taiko, because everybody is able to pick up a Taiko Bachi and play the Taiko. So they've all played Taiko going through Saishin Dojo. And we'll continue
and they all
to
can
do
make
that.
tofu by themselves.
Yeah, they can make tofu by themselves. They can make udon by themselves. So we're just trying to continually pass this on. If they pick it up, fine. If somebody takes my place, fine. If nobody takes my place, something else will be created. Maybe they'll teach African drumming or something like that in the future. We don't know. But something culturally, hopefully, can continue.
Thank you, Johnny. I noticed that Chris is still on, and so is Kenny Endo, some of the original people I met. Do you have any comments?
Well, one of the things I'd like to offer up is one thing I like to tell people in the group or share with people is it's just not about Taiko. Kinnara is just not Taiko. There's the temple things, there's your lives and things. It's, it's beyond just drumming. Your life is more than drumming. And I think if we all kept that perspective in mind and we try to do that, we're a much happier group of people.
Thank you. Anything else? What I want to do now is close this recorded portion, and then we'll open it up for anyone who has any questions to ask any questions, so it won't be on the video. So we'll close now with Gasho, please. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.